Okay, I have 8 undervalued wide receivers here for you. Maybe you've already had your draft and this can be a buy low video. Maybe you haven't had your draft and you want to target these guys a little earlier than your league mates. But before we get into it, I owe you a massive thank you. I know everybody knows at this point, if we hit 90,000 subscribers who are doing that 24-hour live stream before the season starts. And dear God, I literally said that because I thought there was no way it would happen. But with the amount of times y'all been going down there smashing that like button, it looks like we're hitting 90,000 subs before the season starts. So it looks like I may end up having to do that live stream. So if you want to draft with us in that 24-hour live stream, or if you want to draft with us legitimately anytime, we stream every single night real money fantasy football drafts on Underdog Fantasy. Of course, never too late to go sign up. When you sign up for Underdog and use promo code FLOCK, they're going to match your first deposit dollar for dollar up to $100. So it's free for you to try out. You're going to get our 2022 fantasy football rankings and our 300-page draft guide that's going to help you even if you've already had your draft. Of course, you can find that link down there in the description and also down there below. Just because I appreciate everybody so damn much, I'm going to respond to at least the first 200 comments on this video. I'll probably try to respond to even more than that. But let's go through. Let's start it off with our first wide receiver. He's not undervalued in high stakes drafts. In high stakes drafts, he goes the 1-2 turn. But if we're looking at Fantasy Pros ADP here, you have CeeDee Lamb as the wide receiver 8 behind Tyreek Hill, behind Deebo Samuel. What are y'all doing here? If we compare this to Underdog, where obviously you have a crap ton of high money drafts going off, you have CeeDee Lamb as the wide receiver 6 and a clear tier before guys like Deebo Samuel and Tyreek Hill. So if I'm going to be honest with you, I don't necessarily think that CeeDee Lamb wide receiver 6 is some superb value, but if you're getting him in a casual redraft format at the end of the second round, that's a price point you can't pass up on, because with CeeDee Lamb, he's been incredible through the first 2 years of his NFL career. 2.2 yards per route run last season, in an offense that had Amari Cooper, in an offense that had Cedric Wilson, an offense that sometimes had Michael Gallup in it. And now he's going to be starting off this season with no Amari, with no Cedric Wilson. They try to bolster the wide receiver depth by bringing in James Washington. Well, James Washington's not going to be available at the beginning portion of the season either. Michael Gallup's not going to be ready to go at the beginning of the year. And we just know there are going to be a million points scored in this Dallas Cowboys offense. They were number 1 in the NFL last season in points scored. And the reason for this is since Kellen Moore has taken over as the offensive coordinator for the Dallas Cowboys, this team has been a top 3 offense consistently in pace of play in game neutral environments and passing rate over expectation. So they play it like a video game. They play it as if it's Madden. Lamb was an elite level prospect coming out of OU. Now, trust me, I never want to root for an Oklahoma Sooner. Hook 'em horns. OU sucks. But we got to give credit where credit's due. Lamb's a very, very special player stepping into the perfect situation, the best situation you could ever imagine this year. If you're drafting him at the end of round 2 for your casual fantasy football league, great value. And now our next guy is going to be someone that's actually fallen over the past few weeks, and I don't really understand why. This is Hollywood Brown. So with Hollywood Brown in these high stakes leagues, he's usually going at the beginning of the 4th round as the wide receiver 21. If we're going to be comparing this to what you have with just Fantasy Pros ADP, so I'm going to assume that this is more the casual redraft crowd, you have Hollywood Brown going off the board at the 5-6 turn. And in my opinion, great spot to be in, because very similar to the Dallas Cowboys offense, Cliff Kingsbury runs this Arizona team as if it's Madden. This is yet another offense that we can confidently predict will be top 5 in the NFL in pace of play in game neutral environments, as well as very high with their passing rate over expectation. So we can assume that if this offense is playing like Madden, if Kyler Murray is going to see significantly more passing attempts than what we've had with Lamar Jackson over the past 2 years in Baltimore, which that will be the case, you do have a significantly better situation for Hollywood Brown in fantasy this season. Now, I already know we have people down there going to Will Mason. He has DeAndre Hopkins. And yes, he's going to have to deal with DeAndre Hopkins through the final 11 weeks. If you're that worried about DeAndre Hopkins, you can go through. You could try to sell him high after the first month of the season if he's a high-end wide receiver too. And you can book that production and then be able to possibly sell him for a higher price than where you drafted him. But I would also counter that saying, well, he was never going to be the top option in Baltimore this upcoming year, where we can assume that Mark Andrews was going to see a 25-26% team target share. Maybe you're a fan of Rondale Moore. I loved Rondale Moore coming out of Purdue. I ignored the size concerns with Rondale, and I said, Hell, look at his freshman season production. He declared early for the NFL draft, and he went in round 2. So I was excited about Rondale Moore, but based on his failure to be used as a real NFL wide receiver his rookie season, I think you have to be out on him. Like, look at his average depth of target compared to a bunch of different players in this range. He looks more like a running back than a receiver with his average depth of target. Now, let's go to someone where at this price point, I am all in on. We have him ranked as the wide receiver 18. On underdogs, so these higher stakes drafts, he goes wide receiver 22. But according to Fantasy Pros, Jerry Jeudy, wide receiver 27. Jerry Jeudy, high-end wide receiver 3 here. So y'all know I've been advocating Jerry Jeudy's the wide receiver 1 over Courtland Sutton in Denver. And I will say we have them ranked back-to-back. I have Jerry Jeudy 18, Courtland Sutton 19. So honestly, if you're looking at my Courtland Sutton ranking, guys, I just want to say this as a quick side note. I don't want to come out here and say Sutton's some massive value in fantasy. But I have Sutton ranked at wide receiver 19, which if you're looking at underdog, yeah, we're never drafting Courtland Sutton in the 3rd round there. But according to this Fantasy Pros ADP, Courtland Sutton has an ADP of wide receiver 22. So I guess you could say we're higher on Sutton than most. I just love this Denver Broncos passing offense. I was very worried before the Tim Patrick injury. I've said this time and time again, but I thought that you were going to have this Denver Broncos offense very similar to what we had with the Dallas Cowboys last year, where yes, they were number 1 in the NFL in points scored, but in Dallas, you didn't have Lamb with the elite level breakout. Amari didn't win fantasy football leagues. Really, the only league winner at the Dallas Cowboys offense last season was Dalton freaking Schultz. And the reason for this is there were just so many guys. You had Amari Cooper getting his, CeeDee Lamb getting his, Cedric Wilson getting his, Michael Gallup getting his. Then you had Dalton Schultz getting his, Ezekiel Elliott getting his, Tony Pollard. You had so many players taking a small piece of that pie that even if the offense was prolific, since it was divided so many times, nobody really stood out as that elite fantasy option. I was worried about that in Denver before the Tim Patrick injury, but now that you have the Tim Patrick injury, I think that is a massive shift to the concentration of targets between these two top guys in Jerry Jeudy and Courtland Sutton. We have them ranked back-to-back, but the thing is, you get Jerry Jeudy legitimately 2 rounds behind Courtland Sutton sometimes. I'm taking Jerry Jeudy. I'm taking the wide receiver that dominated Courtland Sutton when they were on the field together over the past 2 seasons at almost 4 years younger of age. So we're going to assume that he continues to get better. He's younger than freaking Kenny Pickett. I love me some Jerry Jeudy, wide receiver 27. And now our next wide receiver, I'm not going to lie to you. I am not drafting him on underdog. If y'all are watching us on those live streams, I'm never really taking Juju Smith-Schuster at the 4-5 turn. Like I'm sometimes getting Breece Hall behind Juju. I'm always taking like Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, George Kittle in that range. I love the elite quarterbacks, love the elite tight ends there. But instead of being drafted as the wide receiver 23 here, according to Fantasy Pros has Juju Smith-Schuster off the board as the wide receiver 32. And in a full PPR format, you really do have to like that kind of value just because I do think that the Kansas City Chiefs, top to bottom, are going to be as good offensively this upcoming season as they've been the previous 2 years. And I know a lot of people are very worried about the departure of Tyreek Hill, but I think if we take a step back and we look at the depth that this Kansas City Chiefs offense has, I think you can get excited because with the amount of money they saved by moving on from Tyreek Hill, this team was able to return every offensive line starter. PFF has them graded out to be one of the best offensive lines in football this upcoming season. And yes, you have the downgrade from Tyreek Hill to Marcus Valdes-Scantling or McCole Hardman, whoever you expect to play that role. But you also move on from Demarcus Robinson, Byron Pringle playing a significant amount of snaps here at the wide receiver position, to Juju Smith-Schuster and Sky Moore. So I think top to bottom, defensive coordinators are going to have a tougher time going up against the Kansas City Chiefs, and it's not going to be as simple as just, hell, let's keep 2 safeties back. Let's make sure Tyreek can't beat us deep. And with Juju Smith-Schuster, we've seen the elite level fantasy football finish before. I am very worried about the floor that we may have with Juju, given the fact that if we look at his yards per route run over the past 2 years compared to guys like Deontay Johnson in his same offense, like Juju's definitely fallen off, and I've lost a lot of money betting on Juju in years past. At the end of the day, I think high-stakes drafters are maybe a little bit too excited to draft Juju Smith-Schuster when he's going as the wide receiver 23. But I guess these casual drafters are maybe a little too scared and not necessarily understanding the amount of volume that's going to be available in Kansas City in general. So I find myself in the middle where I think we have Juju Smith-Schuster ranked wide receiver 25. And according to this ADP here on Fantasy Pros, I think Juju's a great value in your home leagues. Now, our next guy is going to be someone that I think is a great value across the board. Wide receiver 30 on Underdog, wide receiver 34 according to Fantasy Pros, Michael Thomas. Now, here with Michael Thomas, I mean, we've talked about this all offseason. There's an extremely wide range of outcomes. Michael Thomas is one of my most drafted players this year, or at least he was my most drafted guy back when he had the wide receiver 40 ADP on Underdog. Oh, those were the days. But with MT, I am 100% willing to admit that this may not work out. Here, you may have Michael Thomas never getting back to form. Maybe he deals with another injury. Maybe with Michael Thomas, he just completely flames out and we never really get to utilize him. That is in the range of outcomes. But we also saw Michael Thomas, the last healthy season that he had, which was the same last healthy season that Christian McCaffrey had, break NFL records, break fantasy football. And we've been talking about this all offseason. People are willing to come out here and say, oh, injuries are random in fantasy football. Draft Christian McCaffrey at the 101 because we've seen a ceiling from him that is higher than anybody else in fantasy. But on the opposite end of the spectrum, Michael Thomas was the wide receiver one that same season Christian McCaffrey was. Both players have dealt with injuries over the past 2 seasons, yet you're getting Michael Thomas as a low-end wide receiver 3, high-end wide receiver 4 in fantasy. Right now, he's being drafted behind Hunter Renfrow. He's being drafted between Elijah Moore and Devonta Smith. I mean, he's being drafted right now on Fantasy Pros 3 wide receiver slots before Tyler Lockett. What I would argue is this is where you swing for the fences. Because if it doesn't work out, who cares? Drop him, pick someone else up off the waiver wire. But if it does work out, you could be looking at a wide receiver 1 in fantasy. Now let's go down to our next guy. This is a very similar to Juju Smith-Schuster, where in Underdog high stakes drafts, I'm not really taking him. But if you're going to be drafting in a casual league, I guess you're going to get a massive value. Rashod Bateman. Now here with Rashod Bateman, this is a wide receiver that was a great prospect coming out of Minnesota, broke out at 18 years old with Tyler Johnson in that same offense. So he had NFL competition there. And then he dominated his final junior season. Then he declares early for the NFL draft, which historically speaking, 100% raises the expected hit rate you should have for an NFL wide receiver. And then not only does he declare early, but he gets drafted in the first round of the NFL draft. So he suffers the groin injury before the season starts. Maybe you can make that as an argument on why Rashod Bateman failed miserably his rookie season, only 1.3 yards per route run. So I personally have Rashod Bateman ranked as a high-end wide receiver 3 in fantasy. I have him around the wide receiver 29 mark, I believe. And if we're looking at Underdog, he's going as the wide receiver 26. So no, I'm not in on that price tag. But here in these casual drafts, Rashod Bateman, wide receiver 38, I think in your casual home league, people aren't going to remember the talent profile that Rashod Bateman had coming out of Minnesota. And at the same time, beyond Mark Andrews, there is no target competition here. So don't draft him in round 5 on Underdog. But if you're getting him at pick 90 in your casual home league, that's a good spot to draft Rashod Bateman. And now our last wide receiver, Kadarius Toney, is someone that's very similar to Michael Thomas. Kadarius Toney here may not stay healthy. Kadarius Toney may have an extremely low floor in fantasy football. But at the end of the day, we are looking at him as a player that does have, in my opinion, a high-end wide receiver 2 ceiling. And I think that is 100% something we want to swing for the fences for. When on Fantasy Pros, he's being drafted as the wide receiver 46. He's being drafted behind guys like Chase Claypool, Robert Woods. I mean, he's being drafted, 9 spots after Tyler Lockett. And here with Kadarius Toney, he had a yards per route run mark that puts him next to only elite level wide receivers. Only elite level wide receivers. If we're looking at per game numbers for Kadarius Toney, going to be extremely skewed because he left games early due to injury, got kicked out of a game for punching. So it's hard to use per game numbers for Kadarius Toney because he wasn't playing full games. But if we break it down to a per snap, a per route run standpoint, he was hyper efficient last year, elite level athlete. Kenny Golladay looks like he's horrible right now in New York Giants camp, at least everything that I see out of New York. So I think Kadarius Toney, if you can pick him up as the wide receiver 46 in your fantasy draft, very similar to Michael Thomas, swing for the fences. If it doesn't work out, if he gets hurt, who cares? You drafted him as the wide receiver 46. Go out there and drop him and pick someone else up off the waiver wire. Now, I think that's all I got for y'all. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please go down there, drop that like. Let me know how stupid I am down there in the comment section. And so I'm assuming everybody watching this is already subscribed, so I better see you out in that 24-hour live stream if we hit 90,000 subscribers. And if you want to draft with us in that live stream or any live stream, we're live every single night. Make sure you go sign up for Underdog Fantasy. Use promo code FLOCK when you sign up. That way they get you that 100% deposit match up to 100. And you get our 2022 rankings, our 2022 fantasy football draft guide. Plus it's best ball, so there's no time commitment at all during the season for those leagues. But thank you again. I appreciate all of y'all so damn much, and I hope I get to see you out with the stream tonight.